Possible Hot Seat. I'm your host, Rebeccah Silence, and this show is brought to you every week by the Healing is Possible 5-Day Challenge and me and my team at RebeccahSilence.com. The mission of the Hot Seat is to bring you possibility, healing, and inspiration wherever you find yourself at the moment that you're watching. And we bring in healers, leaders, influencers, and brave volunteers to laser coach. So if you want some free coaching, if you're ready to launch, get in touch with me right away and we will book you a time to join me in the hot seat. And with all of that being said, today we are talking about the dark, and we are talking about how and why it's so important to connect to the dark in you and outside of you, with very special guest and a new friend of mine, Keno Powers. So Keno, welcome to the hot seat.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So exciting to be here. I want to start just by asking you what your definition of healing is.
That's a very good question. I think it could be answered in a lot of different ways. But I think it has to do with living more freely and fully without fear, or not necessarily without fear, because I think fear never really goes away. It's what we do with that fear, or how we maybe work around it or with it to accomplish what we want to accomplish.
Yeah. And is fear different than the darkness?
Well, I think fear can create a sense of darkness.
Mm-hmm.
I like the acronym that says fear is false evidence appearing real. And I think oftentimes, I like to talk about the ego and the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. And when I say the subconscious mind, I'm sort of simplifying things, meaning everything other than the conscious mind.
Yeah, I love that.
So the conscious mind is the part of us that sort of operates day to day, like we know what we know and we know what we don't know. And the subconscious is like everything else. And the purpose of the subconscious, it's kind of like a storehouse for all the experiences we have, whether we're conscious of them or not. And within the subconscious lies thoughts, feelings, beliefs, associations that we create. All that's there, and we might not even know it's there. And the ego's role is like a gatekeeper. It knows everything that's in the subconscious. And the ego's role is to protect us from mental, emotional, and physical threats, whether they're real or not. And so oftentimes the ego is like a master manipulator, and it knows us better than we know ourselves. And so the ego's main goal is to look good, not make mistakes, and to be right. And the reason for that is to protect us from looking bad, or being judged or humiliated or ridiculed or made wrong. And I'll give you an example of how the ego works. I have a rental property in a different state, and I flew there this last weekend to facilitate the leaving of one tenant and the coming in of another. And I forgot to take tools with me, and I only had one day between to do any work that needed to be done. And I knew that my neighbor had tools. And so I thought, well, I should go and ask him, for some screwdrivers. But my ego didn't want me to, because I would look bad because I had forgotten my tools.
Keno is freezing up just a little bit here, but let's all think about how our egos have impacted us and maybe prevented us from healing or connecting or from being willing to face what's in the way of our next level or our next right step, whatever that might be. I love this conversation already. Keno will be back. And, our ego is something that is not our fault. And I think that's really important for us to own and consider. It's not our fault that we have an ego. It's literally there to protect us. However, there's life beyond survival mode. There's absolutely life beyond survival mode, and looking at and exploring our ego without shame is a big part of that. And now Keno's back. Keno, I think your connection might be a little wonky, but we're just going to keep going here.
Sure. So you were asking about the dark.
Yeah, and by the way, we should introduce you a little more. Like who are you and what do you do? And then let's talk about the dark.
Sure. So I like to see myself as an agent for transformation and personal development. And I'm several things. I am a shaman, a modern day shaman who happens to be a psychic and a medium. And I'm also a mindful money coach. So I help people heal their relationship with money. And I'm also a life coach. I help people move towards their aspirations, or maybe work on a dream that they have, or certain goals that they have that they procrastinate on for one reason or another.
I love it. I love it. So what do you want us to know about the dark?
Well, I think the dark, there can't be dark without light. And we can focus on the dark or we can focus on the light, and know that healing is possible, as you know. And sometimes it takes courage to face things that are in the dark. It's like a little kid thinking there's a monster in the closet. And what happens is when we open that closet, what we come to find is that there really isn't a monster there. It's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, when Toto the dog pulls the curtain back from the Wizard of Oz, we see that it's not some scary monster, but it's just a man. And it's the same thing with our fears and what we think might be in the dark. So,
well, what if, can I just ask a question about that? But what if there is a monster? I mean, I like that it is just a man or a person. A Course in Miracles talks about that there's no fear. There's no, what's the word that they use in A Course in Miracles? There's no judgment that isn't about someone in a body, right? It always has to do with a person in a human body having a human experience. But what if there is literally a perpetrator or an abuser or someone there that in the eyes of whoever it is that's experiencing it is a monster?
Right.
Because that does exist too, right?
What's that?
That does exist as well.
Yes. And I think, as a survivor of sexual abuse myself, and I was abused by men at different times throughout my life, my healing was about looking at how I was a victim and what I could do now to change that. And looking at all the feelings that I had, the shame, thinking something was wrong with me, the self-loathing, really taking a look at that and healing it with compassion and understanding, and realizing that I was never going to be a victim again once I started the healing process.
Yeah, I love that, because in abuse, and I'm also a survivor of multiple forms of abuse, including sexual. And it is back to where we started today, conversation about ego. I think about outwitting, outsmarting, and outlasting that ego to get beyond that victim-based experience, or almost persecutor based experience, which can happen as well. Not everybody that's abused is in this victim consciousness, right? Sometimes people are abused and they're ready to fight and never be abused again, taking other people out in that process. So yeah, I love this. I love this conversation. What else? Let's just keep going here.
Sure. Well, there are ways of sort of disarming the ego, and it involves practicing being vulnerable. It involves practicing asking for help, um, facing things that scare us, and taking action towards them. Because really, courage is not necessarily a feeling; it's a decision, and so it involves taking risks. And I like the idea that courage is not the absence of fear, but it's taking action in spite of fear. And sometimes, if we feel fear, sometimes just naming the fear helps dissolve the fear or the hold that the fear has over us from making a decision that's healthy for us. And I think meditation is a great tool to help us counter the fear that we might be feeling. And I also talk about mindfulness and awareness, because when we have mindfulness, we're examining the sort of intimate conversation that we have in our minds. And when we get to know what that is, then we create this awareness. And with awareness, we have more options and better choices to make.
I love that. Absolutely. And then I also love what you're saying about courage. It's a verb. I've got 5 steps to healing, and the healing is possible movement and courses and coaching that I do. And the first step is courage.
Right.
And there isn't dark without light as much as there isn't light without dark.
Exactly.
And it's always there. And that's what I'm hearing too when you're talking about like the Oz behind the curtain. It's just a man. It's like the little bit of light is more powerful than the dark always.
Right. And what helped me too in some of my darkest times was the yin yang symbol.
Mm-hmm.
And what it tells us is that at the time of greatest darkness, it's right before the time of light, when the light is going to show up. So things can
Yeah.
be really dark, and if you just hang on, the light will be there.
And I also really like what you said too about fear isn't the same necessarily as dark, but it can bring more of an experience of the dark.
Mm-hmm.
And would you talk about resistance?
Well, I think resistance can be ego-based, and
Mm-hmm.
it's typically about maybe we're not going to survive. I mean, it depends on what sort of healing somebody is trying to accomplish. I guess I'm sorry. You're going to have to ask me the question again.
Well, let's just talk about resistance and how
Yeah.
resistance keeps the ego fed,
Mhm.
and resistance keeps the experience of dark maybe stronger than that experience of light that, as you were saying, it's right there. It's coming.
Well, I think it's scary. Like healing can be like opening Pandora's box,
For
and
sure.
there are a lot of feelings and memories that we might have to experience um, as part of the healing process. And so that resistance might be there to protect us from having that experience. I know for myself, when I started healing from the abuse, I went through suicidal depression. and went through some really dark times in my life. And, what I did was I got help. So, like, I went to a support group, and I also saw counselors one-on-one, and I did, these like 3 and 5 day intensives that were all about healing. And so that's one way to, I think, work with resistance, is to get help,
Yeah.
to recognize that help is a good thing. And it's not a bad thing to ask for help. But it takes courage. And we have to, in order to heal, we do have to face that resistance, and we have to face that fear. One of the quotes that helped me through my healing process was, "The only way out is through."
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I realized in my healing process was, I'll use the analogy of a ladder. I was on like the 4th rung, let's say, of a 10 rung ladder. I was on the 4th rung. And that's sort of the level I was operating in my life before I started my healing process. And when I started my healing process, like I said, went through some really dark places. But in that healing process, I learned concepts and strategies that empowered me and made me a stronger person, so that at the other end, after years of healing, I was on like rung number 8. So I was definitely, at a higher level. And I had, I guess, less issues that were holding me back in my life from doing what I wanted to do, and just also feeling states. I was more empowered. I didn't feel, I wasn't depressed as often as I used to be. And I felt like more positive about life. And I felt like I had more options about what I could do with my life as a result of the healing.
And when and how did you decide to connect to your purpose of being in the world as a healer?
Well, that came early on, when I just had this awareness when I was young. And, I started having experiences with the world of spirit when I was a kid. My first experience hearing my higher self's inner voice was when I was 14 years old. And then I had another experience when I was 16 that was very profound. And it just made me realize there's a lot more to life than our culture generally accepts or acknowledges. And so I was interested in healing from a young age. And I made the conscious choice to do the healing work rather than to medicate myself with alcohol or drugs. And I do see that was an option I, considered. And I didn't want to do that because I could see people around me doing that, and it didn't look like something I wanted to do. So I made the conscious choice to look for help, and I did, and it made all the difference.
And
And so, in my healing process, I got to a point where I knew I wanted to help other people. And so I did, like for survivors of sexual abuse, I facilitated support groups to help people deal with the issues that I had to deal with. And then I became a massage therapist. And so I did that for a long time. Yeah.
And then when did you decide is it training to become a shaman? Tell us about that. Like
Sure.
the becoming of where you are now and what you do and what it means.
Yeah, that's a good question. So in the world of shamanism, there are really like 2 ways that people can be initiated as a shaman. One is you can study with a shaman. And the other is, and something I learned long after I was initiated, there are some shamans who have the ability to transfer their gifts and their powers to another person. And that's what happened with me, except it was by the spirit of a Native American healer. So I received a phone call one night from a good friend of mine who was experiencing a lot of pain. And she asked me if I would come over to her house and work on her. And so I did. I went over to her house. She was lying on her living room floor, and I started working on her neck and shoulder. I was kneeling next to her. And all of a sudden, I felt the presence of a spirit in the room. And at this point in my life, I was, familiar with that kind of thing. And so when I mentally acknowledged the spirit, he moved in closer and he revealed himself to me as a Native American shaman. And he asked me if I wanted to have a communion with him. And I didn't know what he was asking, but out of a sense of awe and curiosity, I said yes. And what happened next is something that you might see on like Star Trek. His energy superimposed itself over mine. And I was like in this cocoon of energy and had the most profound, blissful state of like being one with the universe. And it felt very timeless, but I think it only, lasted a few moments. And then he moved away, and I could tell that he was going to leave the room. But before he did, he telepathically told me that he had given me this gift. And the gift was using his voice and his healing energy. And so one of the things I do is I chant using sort of his voice. And what's powerful about that is it's kind of like music that moves us, like a beautiful piece of music, how it can move our heart. And what it does is it takes a person out of their logical thinking mind and touches them like in their heart space, and can also sort of put people in an altered state, a slightly altered state, where they're more open to receiving information from their subconscious.
I love it. And now you're doing a combination of what? How do people work with you? What is it that you're providing?
Sure. So if somebody schedules like a psychic reading with me or a mediumship reading, I offer the ability to do energy work as well. And so I just sort of do a body scan, and then I can read a person's energy, and sometimes physical ailments start on an energetic level, and I can feel where there might be some issues on an energetic level, and then I can work with that to release and move the energy. And then if somebody wants me to work with them as a shaman, then I do I also use my psychic abilities to tap into some of the issues that somebody might be working on, whether they're conscious of it or not. For example, some people maybe who are survivors and have sort of suppressed that memory, or think that, it's not as big of a deal as it really is, I can sort of tap into that and help them realize that it is affecting their lives, because everything in the subconscious is affecting our lives, whether we know it or not. And so by becoming conscious of that, then we can start the healing process. And so with the shamanic work, that's kind of what I help people do. And it can be anything from just feeling more relaxed to getting in touch with some issues that maybe they don't realize are affecting them.
Yeah. So you're really saying being more conscious allows you to look behind that curtain to face whatever it is, with the understanding that it really isn't more powerful than you.
Exactly.
Right. Like that's what we're talking about. And then I'm really excited, everybody, because we're going to bring Keno back next week to really give us a masterclass. And that's in the works. It'll be a treat. But today I just wanted us all to meet him, and I wanted us to really consider the power of one of my other steps is we got to face the music. We have to be inspired to face the music. That's my third step in healing, whatever that is, so that we can use it somehow as rocket fuel to step more into our purpose, more into living deeper and more fully. And, I love that you're an example of this possibility and of really embodying and living having the courage
Right.
that it takes.
Yeah. Well, and I thank you so much for having me on the show. And, I just am so blessed and honored to be a part of someone's healing journey and to be a catalyst for, maybe the next step in their healing process.
Yeah. And what do you believe about healing? I believe that the person is always their own healer, and then we're just providing space for that. What are your beliefs?
That's a really amazing question because I believe that just about anything is possible when it comes to healing. You know, I've read about people who have their bodies are riddled with cancer, and a moment later, the cancer is completely gone. And I haven't had that kind of experience personally, but one experience I did have was I had the opportunity once to walk across hot coals. And it was an amazing, mind blowing experience. And one of the reasons why it was because I walked across the coals several times one evening. And one of the times I got a really bad blister on my foot. And it was one of those kinds where, it's like the size of my thumb and it was filled with liquid and it was kind of painful. And the next morning it was completely gone. Like there was no sign of this blister at all. And so that just showed me, a small example of how powerful healing can be. And so where does healing come from? That's a good question. And I don't know that I have an answer, except to say that I do feel like sometimes it comes from love or having compassion for ourselves. Sometimes it comes from a catharsis because when we have a catharsis, it's like the storm clearing the air and it moves energy in our body because sometimes dis-ease starts on an energetic level or an emotional level. I think oftentimes what I notice is that there's a disconnect between physical ailments and the fact that there's an emotional component and an energetic component to healing. And oftentimes people are just focused on the physical, like taking an aspirin to
That's good.
take care of a headache.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's just oftentimes a Band-Aid. So like, taking mindfulness and making an inquiry, like, what is it? Why do I have this headache? And maybe it's because a person feels really stressed out. Okay, well, what do you feel stressed out about? Well, maybe a person is scared about something that they're having to do. And so looking at that and examining, well, how can I change that experience? And maybe like using affirmations to help us shift the conversation that we're having in our mind from I'm not good enough or I don't have what it takes to, yes, I do have what it takes. And I do have the inner resources. And maybe it's about asking for help or, sometimes just having a realization can change what's going on in our physiology.
Yeah. And I know for me as a cancer survivor, what I knew somehow, and I don't know how I knew this, but I knew that regardless of the physical symptoms and issues and the very real cancer cells that were spreading in my body, I had control over the emotional work.
Right.
And so if you want access to support, if you're ready for that emotional support and access to tools that can help you heal emotionally, getting to the point where that ego has the volume turned down, the fear isn't leading, you're leading it. Get started on the 5-day Healing is Possible challenge now. Just go to RebeccahSilence.com and you will get a roadmap for support that Keno's talking about today. And then, Keno, how do people get in touch with you in between now and when we have you back next week?
Well, sure. They can reach me by email at kenopowers.com.
Awesome. Thank you. Final thoughts.
I think you're amazing. You're awesome. And I'm just so happy to be here talking to you and getting to know you as a person and as a healer.
Wonderful to have you. We will see you all back next week, same time, same place, every Tuesday, 10 a.m. Mountain. Healing is possible, everyone. Please also put in the comments any questions or big takeaways that you got from this session. We absolutely want to hear from you, and we will see you soon.